Have you ever heard of the book, The 5 Love Languages? It's a great book, came out in the 90s-ish, became an international bestseller, sold millions and millions of copies. And my point in bringing it up is not to do a commercial for that book. Some love it, some hate it, whatever. I think it makes some really good points, but one of the fundamental points of Chapman's book is that people show love in different ways and people receive love in different ways. And very often one of the problems in relationships, not just love relationships, work relationships, friendships, parent-to-child relationship, one of the fundamental problems is that somebody is showing love in one way, but the other person isn't receiving it. They're not feeling loved. So what the author is basically saying is I can be showing love in the form of, doing nice things for you, but you really feel love most when someone just wants to spend time with you or when someone says a kind word. So you're never really connecting. And the underlying premise of that is fascinating. That book only exists because it acknowledges the fact that two people can have the same experience. Yes, I gave you a gift, and yes, you received the gift, but it wasn't an experience of a loving act. If my love language in receiving that gift is, let's say, words, gifts don't really hold meaning for me. Whereas perhaps for you, in giving the gift, that has big meaning, you chose it specifically meant for me. So two people are having the same experience, yet having a very different experience. That's the underlying premise. Well, if we allow for the possibility that two people can have the same experience, but have very different experiences within that experience, have very different interpretations of that experience, if we allow for that possibility, then where I see that most often is particularly in a parent-child relationship, that a parent is saying, no, that's not what happened. No, that didn't happen. No, you're wrong. That didn't happen in childhood. I didn't do that. Those things didn't happen to you. You're lying. You're making it up. And because the parent has always had that imbalance of power over the child, because the child was small, and so the parent has always been sort of a godlike figure in that child's life, because they have the power, they've been able to continue to ram down the child's throat, no, that's not what happened. But is it possible that the parent and the child had the same experience, but the child experienced it very differently? So what you thought you were doing as a parent wasn't what that child was experiencing. And is it possible their experience of that event is just as valid as yours? Furthermore, is it possible that you're actually wrong as the parent? I'm 55 years old, and I can honestly say my memory does go somewhat. And I guarantee you my mind was far sharper at 25 than it is now at 55. So there's also the possibility that the parent is just plain fucking wrong. But beyond that, that child's experience of how you parented is just as valid as your experience of what you experienced and felt as you were parenting. That's something to consider. So is it possible you're so fucking wrapped up, parent, in your fucking ego that doesn't want to admit you made mistakes? And every parent makes mistakes. It's not that grand of a fucking admission. Furthermore, what is really being helped by you holding fast to, no, I'm right, you're wrong? What is gained? Is there some empirical truth that in a given event, in a given situation, there is only one truth? That's bullshit. People can experience multiple truths within the same experience. Multiple experiences within the same event. So you want to continue to deny your child's reality? Go for it. You're only alienating that child. You want to know why? Because their power is growing as your power is fading. You're holding fast because your fucking ego doesn't want to admit that this person's experience is just as valid as mine. Your ego insists on you being right, you being in control, and you not admitting fault because somehow perhaps you think it's weak. Somehow perhaps you think you get less love. Somehow perhaps you think you won't be liked or won't be loved if you admit any fault when it's precisely the opposite. What's the fault you need to admit? What's the reality that you're not wanting to look at that's just as valid as the one you've been selling? Have a kick-ass day. File this under shit they don't tell you when you're fucking 20 or nobody knows when you're fucking 18 or 22. I have had 2 conversations this week with people at the very top of their game. One was a gentleman who worked in a West Coast city, a bit of a friend of mine, new friend, just retiring from being what's called a master rigger in construction, building huge skyscrapers and so forth. A rigger is the person who attaches the chains and shit that go on the crane and when they're moving shit on a job site. A master rigger is the one who oversees it all and so forth. And among the trades, master rigger is one of the very highest, if not the highest paid of all the trades. And this gentleman was retiring, and I asked him, I said, what would you do differently if you had a chance to do it all over again? And he says, you know, it's funny you bring that up, Sven. And so this was the first conversation I had. And the second one was with a female surgeon about 50 years old. And so it's interesting what they had to say. I said, what to this guy, what would you do if you had a chance to do it over again? He says, well, you know, Sven, there's so many people talking nowadays about, oh, don't fucking go to college and, you know, you're going to walk out with all this debt. And ironically, with my own kids, they didn't have a lot of debt, and what debt they had, they worked their asses off to pay off, and they felt really good about it. But I didn't have a college degree, Sven. I went into the trades, became a rigger, and then a master rigger, and I had a great living. I had a great life, was able to provide for my family, had a good home, and et cetera, et cetera. He said, but if I were to do it over again, on one hand, I wouldn't do it differently, but on the other hand, I would. I said, well, why is that? He says, Sven, because everything has a price. It's just that when you go to college or you go to medical school or you become a, you know, psychologist or whatever, you pay on the front end. You take on that debt on the front end. That's your price. But the price on the back end is my work. My price was on the back end. I said, what do you mean? He said, very often, you know, people who go into the trades pay a price. If you're working with your body, very often the price is the price on your body. He says a lot of guys in my profession, a lot of women too, but a lot of guys in my profession, if you're down on your knees laying carpet, your knees fucking are taking a beating. If you're lifting things and moving around and you're physical, a lot of times it's the back or it's the knees or it's the hip or it's, you know, he says, you know, Sven, there are guys who, and women too, who work doing the insulation into high rises and shit. What do you think's getting into their fucking lungs, Sven? Yeah, they make a good living. They make hellacious cash. But what do you think the price is? And I thought about that. He says, so, you know, every career has a price. Every path has a price, a sacrifice that has to be made, multiple sacrifices. And I thought about that in the second conversation I had with this female surgeon. She said, Sven, you know, yeah, I took on a lot of debt, college, medical school, etc., residency, all that shit. She said, and that was part of the price, but massive payoff. People see where I'm at in my career now, and, you know, I have a good life, a very good life. I make a handsome living and so on and so forth. She said, but there's another price in my work, and the price isn't just what's at the front end, the money which gets paid off. I pay a price during. I said, what's that? She says, I'm in surgery 6 hours or 6 days a week. What do you think the fucking price is on my family? What do you think the price has been on my 2 marriages because of my fucking work schedule? It's the nature of the beast. And so the question becomes, when we're young, you may say, well, if I take this particular career, or if I don't go to college, or if I do go to college, I'll have to eat this cost, or if I don't go to college, I'll have money right away. But every trajectory in life comes with sacrifices, comes with a price. And so if you're being complete about examining your career trajectory, or it can be applied to relationships or anything else, if you're being complete and thorough and deliberate in examining the trajectory of your life, you have to look at where the price is paid, and are you willing to pay the price? Does the gain from this particular career, let's say, outweigh the price of having to have a total knee or a total hip put in when I'm 55, potentially? Or I've got friends who are cops. I grew up very, very blue collar, and on our block, there were 4 of us best friends. 2 of us went in the military, and the other 2 guys became cops. And in the case of both the cops, I remember them saying to me, Sven, police work, it's a young man's game. At least being an officer on patrol. He says it's a young man's game, man. It's high energy shit, and you gotta stay in shape, and it gets old. Once you start having a family and shit like that, the idea of being shot at and shit like that, sure, there's the adrenaline, but it's like, fuck, I got kids, man. You know, it comes at a price. Right? And what these 2 guys were saying is, Sven, if you know, so maybe you then want to be a sergeant, or maybe you want to move up to lieutenant. And who usually gets those jobs? Not just the people who do their work well, but very often, not always, very often it's the people who have the college degrees. So it's just interesting. It's an interesting conversation of, oh, fuck college because it costs money, or fuck the trades, I don't want to work that hard. Everything has a price. What's the price you're willing to pay? And does the benefit of your particular career field outweigh the price that you are going to pay, either at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end? Some good questions. Have a kick. Young couple come up to me and introduce themselves, very respectful, and they said, hey, Sven Erlandson, Badass Counseling, we love you. And they introduced me to their little 6-month-old daughter, cute as a button. And, you know, I love little babies. Their fat little cheeks are so cute and shit. I love it. And so I stood and talked to them, and I was asking them questions like, what's your vision for the future with your parenting? What are your ideas for parenting your child? What are you most looking forward to? Shit like that. And they sort of had blank stares through most of it. They're sweet as a button, you know, but just real nice folks. But they said, you know, Sven, honestly, you know, we don't really think too much about that stuff. We're just going to do our best. and love our kid. And I said, hey, God bless you. I think that's fantastic. Go for it. You know, just wanting to be supportive and encouraging. And as we were sort of bringing the conversation to an end, they said, well, Sven, give us some advice. And I said, no, you guys are great, you know? And they said, no, give us some like badass counseling. And I'm like, no. And they said, no, seriously. And I said, okay, honestly? They said, yeah, honestly. I said, okay, don't do your best. Don't just love your kid. Don't. And they're like, fuck you talking about, old man? I mean, they're kind and everything. But I said, because that's about as low as you can set the bar. Every parent claims that they did their best. Every parent claims they love their kid. But when I get people in my office 20, 30, 40 years later from their childhood, and they've had abuse or they've had trauma or they had to raise their siblings or they had to work, and I don't just mean chores and shit like that. I mean they had to work from a very young age to the point they lost their childhood. People who endured all measure of shit, people who had parents who inflicted that shit, and people who had parents who allowed that shit to be inflicted by the other parent, all sorts of shit. And they say to me, Sven, there's so much pain, and I've talked to my parents, or I've tried to talk to my parents, and you know what they always say, or very often say? Hey, the parent says, hey, I did my best. Hey, I did my best. And they think they were a great parent. They did their best. And yet their kid experienced so much fucking pain. So I guess what I'm saying is just doing your best isn't good enough. That's like me, a guy, you know, I can turn a screwdriver, I can run a lathe, I can work a drill press, but I don't know shit about carpentry. And I tried to hang a door on my back porch, and the fucking thing is fucking crooked. Hey, I did my best. No, man. It's like going into parenting and saying, I'm going to fucking do my best, or I'm going to just do the opposite of what my parents did, as if that's the fucking solution. No, you have to become a deliberate parent. And what does that mean? Most of the harm that gets inflicted upon kids is because of unhealed fucking trauma and pain from the parent's childhood. You want to become a better parent? Every parent makes mistakes and fucks up and so forth. But you want to become a better parent, heal the shit from your fucking past. That's the shit they don't tell you when you're young. It's not enough to do your best. You have to do better. You have to become deliberate. You have to heal your own pain to become a better parent. So you ready? You got the guts? Have a kick-ass day.